Jesus shows up and he's walking along beside these two disciples. They're not part of the 12 apparently, but they are intimately aware of everything that's gone on with the 12. And the reason you know that is because they know where to find them when they go scooting back from Emmaus to Jerusalem. Right? But Jesus comes walk alongside them, almost as if he's going to go on past, and they're like, but they're all downcast. So I guess in modern parlance, he probably said, "What's up?" And they said, "Are you the only person in Jerusalem that doesn't know the things that have happened?" Right? So we're not going to preach this sermon, I'm just telling you about it, right? But at that moment, what does Jesus say? He says, "What things?" Do you ever imagine, what did he do when he said that? What things? I mean, can he even look them straight in the eye and say, "What things?" Because he knew all about it, right? But he's trying to draw them into a conversation. But what I was wondering about was where they said next that Jesus of Nazareth, a prophet, a man mighty in word and deed. And what I was thinking about was just in that moment when they said that, what kind of slideshow went through their head of the things that they had seen him do or things they had heard him say. Well, we don't get to go there today, so that one's free. So I'm going to do something really different than what I originally had been planning up until, I guess, about Thursday night. And it's based on the fact of just some things that happened in the hospital for me this week. But to my fellow squirrels, this is the good news. We are not alone. When we were stationed at Fort Leonard Wood, my father-in-law gave me a t-shirt. And on that t-shirt it said, Power will leave you heartless, lust will leave you loveless, money will leave you comfortless, drugs will leave you senseless, Jesus won't leave you regardless. And then it had some verses listed, and it tied to Hebrews 13:5, which says, "And I will never leave you nor forsake you." Or if you're familiar maybe with Revised Standard Version and the King James says, "I will never fail you nor forsake you." And what I'd like to do, we're going to do just a little bit of a word study today, but we're going to jump back into the Old Testament and look at a trail of promises that go with this idea that he's never going to leave us nor forsake us. So, now having said that, one of the things I'm going to do that I probably don't normally do is I'm going to read some verses but not necessarily make comments on them. I'm not going to expound upon those verses in any real kind of way, but we can start in Genesis 28:15. And this is where Jacob's made a vow at Bethel, but God has spoken to him. And in verse 15 of Genesis 28, it simply says, "Behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken to you." Now, part of what I want us to get to with this today is there's a personal side to being able to grab onto that promise that we will not be left or forsaken. But there's also a practical side to it. And you see that when you go into Hebrews chapter 13, if you read that verse in its context, I've got a sweatshirt, a hoodie the girls got me from a ministry that they like, and it says context, context, context. And I thought about wearing that today just to drive home the fact that we'd want to go back and read that in the book of Hebrews in its context, because it means even more than what most people see it meaning. But there's a bunch of promises that go together, and so we start in Deuteronomy chapter 31, verses 6 through 8. "Be strong and of good courage. Do not fear or be afraid of them." So this is what God is speaking to Moses in what we read in verse 6. This is the end of a conversation God's having to Moses, and then he's going to turn right around and talk to Joshua And Moses will speak on behalf of God to Joshua. But be strong and of good courage, do not fear or be afraid of them. And this is about the people that they're going to encounter in the land. For the Lord your God, He is the one who goes with you. He will not leave you nor forsake you. And then he turns to Moses. Moses called Joshua and said to him in the sight of all Israel. So he gets him up, it's kind of like if they had the big platform, and he brings him up in front of everybody, right? And he says, be strong and of good courage. For you must go with this people to the land which the Lord has sworn to their fathers to give to them, and you shall cause them to inherit it. And the Lord, He is the one who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you nor forsake you. Do not fear, nor be dismayed. Now, there's another conversation then that takes place in the first chapter of the book of Joshua. And that's in Joshua chapter 1. And it's in verse 5, but I'm going to start reading with verse 1. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord spoke to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, to the land which I am giving to them, the children of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, as I said to Moses. From the wilderness and from this Lebanon as far as the great river, Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, and to the great sea, toward the going down of the sun, shall be your territory. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Now, listen to this next phrase, because this had to roll like thunder. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. The force of that caught me this morning. I'd been preparing for this sermon, but the force of that caught me this morning. I was reviewing my notes. As I was with Moses, I will be with you. And you just got to think about it. Put yourself in Joshua's shoes for a minute. If you remember anything from the first 5 books of the Bible, and especially though from Exodus on and Moses' role and the things that Moses had seen and what God had done in and through Moses. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. Now apparently Joshua must actually be a little timid, even though he's been able to stand pretty bold at times, right? He was one of 2 spies that went out into the land. There were 12 that were sent to spy out the land, and he and Caleb came back with a good report, and the other 10 said, oh no, we're like grasshoppers in their sight. And Joshua and Caleb said, oh no, that ain't the way this plays out. So they were bold, but he's 40 years old when he becomes Moses' assistant. At this point in time, he's 80. And he's had 40 years of watching what God is doing in Moses. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. And then what does it say? I will never leave you nor forsake you. So, I was all trucking along. I had either the sermon from Luke 24 or I had another one from the book of Titus about grace. I thought that might be a good sequel to what we had done a few weeks ago when we talked about grace and what makes grace glorious. And then on Thursday afternoon, it was just falling apart in our hospital. Not because people weren't working hard, but just people with problems, right? A baby brought in that's 7 weeks old that weighs 5 pounds, failure to thrive. Whose young mother was absolutely clueless about how to take care of that child. An older man who had been brought in, he had a toxic level of Dilantin in his system, so he has to take an anti-seizure medicine, but every now and then you got to back off those things because it can get to this toxic point, and so it almost made him look like he had a stroke. And they're getting him all cleaned out, and then suddenly, boom, he has the exact same symptoms, even though all those levels have come down. They don't know what's going on, right? A lady that's battling leukemia, and suddenly it's decided, oh, more chemo. She was doing, the chemo was doing what it was supposed to do, but it's just really kicking her, and I can't do this, right? And so, fast forward to yesterday morning, And I get to go to Maryville to represent the hospital and talk about advanced directives with however many people show up at the community health fair. And just so you know, I hate talking about advanced directives. Army chaplains don't do that. And if you cut me, I bleed green. So this whole deal, being the hospital chaplain, doing some of the things we have to do, it's just a little weird for me. Have you thought about dying? Do you know what your wishes are for your end-of-life care? I don't like that conversation. I don't want you to have it with me, and I don't want to have it with you. I'd like to be able to avoid that. Wouldn't we all like to live in denial? It's such a happy place to be. Right? So I'm driving into Maryville. I'm on South Main. I have to stop at the hospital. I come to the light down below the hospital. I have to look up and see behind me there's this car that's come roaring up on me with its flashers on. And as soon as the light turns green and I start to move forward, they roar past me and into the hospital parking lot. And I was going there anyway, so I park and I come walking across just in time to hear that awfulest wailing. And this one woman just throws herself down in the entryway to the hospital. Boom, laying on the floor. A whole bunch of people standing there. They eventually got her up and moved her out of the way. I'm not ready to walk up and say, "Hi, I'm Greg. I'm the hospital chaplain. Can I help you?" So I skirted around to the back side of the ER and just came in and said, "Hey, I don't know what I'm walking into. You better fill me in quick." And they're all looking at one another like, "Well, who called the chaplain?" Because typically they would have called for me, but they hadn't made that phone call yet. So I apparently was in the right place at the right time and ended up being there for about 5 hours. But there was a lady who had just, they brought in, she was unresponsive, and they had just pronounced her dead like 8 minutes prior, and this was one of her daughters. So what does all that have to do with this? To my fellow squirrels, we are not alone. You know, it's easy to say that, or even to take some of these verses and say, well, he said he'll never leave us nor forsake us. And just kind of, I don't want to trivialize it, but there's times, depending on how you say that, it would be like putting your little Jesus Band-Aid on somebody else's, what we would talk about in the military, a sucking chest wound. Right? And a Band-Aid's not going to cover it. At the same time, it's true. But so what? I'm not really sure how to just walk into every patient's room right now and tell them this, because each one's got their own unique circumstances going on, right? But I need them to know. If you've trusted yourself to Jesus Christ, you are not alone. So let me give you a couple of ways to think about it. And I'm going to do one of the things that I hate it when preachers do. I'm going to read something from my phone because I didn't get it printed off. And I apologize for that. But you guys familiar with a movie called Alone Yet Not Alone? Came out in 2013. It was about couple of young, the French and Indian Wars in the 1750s, and families that were being taken captive as the French and the Indians had raided, and especially the Indians were taking them hostage, and they were led back, and they were being kept in these Indian villages. And it's a story of a Christian family. They experience that. They have some daughters that are taken off, and the daughters are there for a while, and then eventually they escape. And it's about it's about their journey coming home. But the theme song is sung by Johnny Erickson Tata. And the theme song is Alone Yet Not Alone. So it says, I'm alone yet not alone. God's the light that will guide me home. With his love and tenderness leading through the wilderness. And wherever I may roam, I'm alone yet not alone. I will not be bent in fear. He's the refuge I know is near. In his strength I find my own. By his faithful mercy shown, that so mighty is his shield, all his love is now revealed. And when my steps are lost and desperate for a guide, I can feel his touch, a soothing presence by my side. Alone yet not alone, not forsaken when on my own. I can lean upon his arm and be lifted up from harm. If I stumble or if I'm thrown, I'm alone yet not alone. When my steps are lost and desperate for a guide, I can feel his touch as a soothing presence by my side. He has bound me with his love. Watchful angels look from above. Every evil can be braved, for I know I will be saved. Never frightened on my own. I'm alone, yet not alone. All right, now, my friend, and I want to call him my good friend, although that seems a little presumptuous, Michael Card has written the song, Never Will I Leave You, that's based on the passage in Hebrews that has it. And Michael's lyrics are this: trust in me. Keep your life free from what the love of money will do. Am I not enough for you? And then the chorus goes, never will I leave you. That's something I'll never do. Forever remember that it's true. Never will I leave you. When you fear the scars and tears, remember what I've sworn. I will be with you through the storm. And when you fear, that's when I'm near. Your soul's security will you believe. Never will I leave you. That's something I'll never do. Forever remember that it's true. Never will I leave you. And I suggest it'd be some good homework to Google some of that maybe today. And you ought to listen to Johnny sing that song. And then you really ought to listen to Michael sing his song, and it's out there. Never will I leave you. It's a beautiful song. But let's think about this trail of promises. So we heard this word to Jacob, I will not leave you, right? And then we hear what Moses is commanded to tell to Joshua. Do not fear, be afraid of them, for the Lord your God, he's the one who goes with you. He will not leave you nor forsake you. So I'm going to show you right now why I didn't study Hebrew, because I can't pronounce the words very well, but the word that's translated leave can be translated fail. In the Old Testament, it's a word rafal. And if you transliterate it into English, it's R-A-W-F-A-W, so I assume it's rafal, right? Unless you're farther from the south, and it might be rafal, but it means to slacken, to cease, to forsake, to be idle, to leave, to let go or to let down, to be slothful, to be weak. Those are all within this range of how this word can be translated. So what does that mean for us? Well, he's not going to be slothful toward us. You know what it means to be slothful, right? Slothful people can look very industrious doing nothing. Although sometimes they're more like what it talks about in the book of Proverbs, where it talks about how the door turns on its hinges, so a lazy man on his bed, right? But God's got his priorities straight when it comes to loving us and knowing us and seeing us through. But he's not going to be slack toward us. He's not going to be idle. And even if we can't necessarily see what he's doing, he's not going to be idle toward us. And the word that's translated then, forsake, I will never leave you nor forsake you, is azab, I think is how you say it. A-W-Z-A-B is the transliteration. So he's not going to fail us. He's not going to forsake us. He's not going to leave us in the idea of like to leave destitute or to leave off. He's not going to relinquish us. One of the ways to think about it is just when it could be translated to loosen, and I would like to think of it this way. He's not going to loosen his grip on us. Remember in John chapter 10, and Jesus is talking about being the good shepherd, and he says, I and the Father are one. He goes on to talk about, and no one can snatch them from my hand. Some of us would like to think, well, I might be able to slip through his fingers, and you just need to hear it today. No one can snatch them from my hand. In the New Testament, when we get down to that passage in Hebrews, the two words, so it's I'm going to butcher this one for sure, and I do know how to read Greek. That's the worst part of it. Aniami, or Nehemiah, it literally means to send back, but that's the word that could be translated for to fail, right, or to leave. But so you could translate it like to send, to let go, to loosen. But basically just, to lose grip on, to lose. And with that, you'd also think of like someone who's going to lose sight of. And then the word for forsake is enkatalipo, which means to leave behind in some place, to desert, to forsake. In Vine's dictionary of the New Testament words, they've got it like to leave in straits or to leave helpless. So, I know that there are times when we're going through stuff and we just are like, okay, well, so it says that, but I don't feel it. And I'm just going to ask you not to camp out there. That's going to be your choice. If you're just going to be guided by your feelings. I may have told this story here years ago, but one time I was driving across Arizona, and it was in the summertime. As Jerry Clower would say, it was in the hot summertime. And I'm about 10 miles out of Douglas, Arizona, taking a friend we were going to Tucson and then down to Nogales. And I was driving this big Dodge van that belonged to one of my professors from Oral Roberts University. And it's 100 degrees or so outside, and it's not got to the hot part of the day yet. And I kid you not, I happened to look down at the oil pressure gauge, and it just went, boo. And I think if I'd had the door open, it would have fallen out of the van onto the floor. So I pull over ever so gently. I didn't shut the thing off because I didn't know what was going on. I'm listening. I don't hear any funny noises. I raise the hood. I don't see oil running out any place. And so it's flashers on, and we're driving to Douglas, right? And I get to Douglas, Arizona, and I find a mechanic, and he's like, oh, yeah, I'll look at it. So he unscrews where the oil pressure, the sensor unit goes into the side of the engine, screws in his own little thing, and everything was fine. But the gauge wasn't reading right. And I just would want to offer that there are times that our emotions do that. They're telling us something important, but they can't tell us the whole story. So you can't just rely on them. You especially can't build your Christian life upon your emotions. Well, that was a great sermon. It stirred me up. Well, what about the great sermon where you felt like your toes got stepped on? Well, I didn't like that one. Well, but did you need it, right? And the same thing, you can be reading along in the scripture. Oh, that's such a pretty passage. And then you find something else. Are you just going to rely upon your emotions? So that's a whole other sermon. I don't want to park there, but let's turn to Hebrews 13 for a minute. Let me read you some verses, and I'm going to be down here in just a minute. But we'll think about how we can apply this. In Hebrews 13, just begin in verse 1, it says, let brotherly love continue. So keep on loving the brothers, right? Fellow believers. Do not forget to entertain strangers, for by doing so, some have unwittingly entertained angels. And this was about the idea of how important hospitality was in that New Testament world. And in some ways, maybe a reminder for us how important hospitality might be. Just as far as being hospitable. We'd hope, well, let me put it for you this way. When I was, as an Army chaplain, I'd look around our chapel sometimes, and I'd have to get on to our chaplain assistants, because dude, I want this place to have a hospitable feel to it. I don't want it looking like just something that an institution threw up. But we do things, and you guys have done some things in your building recently. Things to kind of enhance that hospitable thing, right? Make it feel friendly as people come in. And you're doing things too as far as greeting people and all that hospitality. But what about even just what we do with our homes and how we are as people? Are we hospitable? Remember the prisoners as have chained with them those who are mistreated, since you yourselves are in the body also. And there it's talking about people who are being persecuted for their faith. As well, perhaps it's just maybe a broader thing about those who suffer in prison. Do we care? Then it says, marriage is honorable among all, and the bed undefiled, but fornicators and adulterers God will judge. And part of it is just that, here's where we get to these practical things, right? It should lead us to love fellow believers. It should lead us, to know that He's with us. Should lead us to remember to show hospitality. To know that He's with us, to care for the suffering and the persecuted. To know that He's with us ought to shape how we think about marriage and the purpose of marriage. What if God is more concerned about making two people holy than He is just about them just always smiling and being happy? What if marriage is in some ways like living in a rock tumbler? And all those rough edges are coming off and we're being polished. And somehow, within that earthen vessel that we are, the treasure that He has planted within us becomes ever more real because of who we are as married people. And it can happen in other relationships too, as far as that, as iron sharpens iron and getting rid of some rough edges. But what if that's part of it? Verse 5, though, says, let your conduct be without covetousness. Be content with such things as you have. For He Himself has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So there's a tie between the fact that He's with us and even how we look at our stuff, how we think about our stuff. Think about with me about the word just to be content for just a second. We were in a Bible study. This is at Fort Leonard Wood. This was a number of years ago. And we're in the book of Philippians, and Paul's talking about how he'd learned to be content in all things. He had learned contentment. And there was a guy from a church background that shall remain unnamed who was what Paul's thorn in the flesh was for him. I felt like he was for me sometimes in Bible study, right? But suddenly he was like, contentment? Well, isn't that just like being apathetic? Dude, did you read the passage? Get a dictionary for one thing, but it's like you're accusing the Apostle Paul of becoming apathetic because he's learned to be content in whatsoever circumstances he finds himself, because he's learned to be abased and he's learned to abound. Every now and then I have those moments when I'd like to shake somebody, and that was one of them. But that, contentment has nothing to do with being apathetic. Maybe it has more to do with suddenly our heart is at rest. You may remember a commercial years ago, and I used this as an illustration more than once when we were living here in Rosendale. Back when Rubbermaid, they were suddenly have all these great storage containers. And there was this house and this young family, and it was a disaster because there was stuff everywhere. And then they came home with all these containers. And some of them slid under the couch. They had ones that went under the bed, and they got everything all organized, and then it's all tucked away. And then what was their next statement? We need more stuff. How American is that? We need more stuff. But what if we could be content with some of the stuff we've got, because he said He'd never leave us nor forsake us. And then it goes on to say, so we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? All right, so when we did things in the military, like if you, there's always kind of a so what. For example, if you get a yearly eval and you have to write up your own stuff for your report card so your commander then can regurgitate it in some way and put it down. But just to say, I'm a really nice guy. So, right? Or I could even say, well, I preached 25 times during my year in Iraq, and I did XXXX. But still, a commander's going to want to know, what is the so what? To what effect? Or if you want to just put it in good civilian parlance, what difference did it make? Right? And when you think about these verses, that's the question then you've got to ask. What difference does it make? What difference does it make for me to say, or me to hear, as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. And to know that in some ways, because of what we celebrated last weekend with the resurrection, that my risen Lord, who was crucified on my behalf, some of those great promises then of the Old Testament, they're every bit as real for us as they were for Joshua. And he's promised them that he'd never fail us nor forsake us. He'd never leave us nor forsake us. He's not just left us alone to wander about on our own and do our own thing. So, sum it up this way. The effect is, or the so what is, it's going to change how we see ourselves. It changes what we do with our challenges. It potentially, because this is a tough one if you live in the United States, it potentially changes how we think about our stuff. Because if you watch what's on television, I'm going to go out on a limb, and then you hear the chainsaw start because I'm going to saw it off behind me. But if you trust everything you hear from somebody who claims to be a minister on television, on that one, some of them will lead you astray. Because they're going to make you think that the one who dies with the most toys wins, right? Or if I can be so bold, it's all about your best life now. Well, no, I don't want my best life now. I'm looking forward to that one. Because it will not be lived in this body. It will be lived in a glorified, transformed body in the presence of my Savior. And then there'll be a whole other bunch of other people that I long to see, that I'll get to see there. That'll be my best life. And this one is training for it. What about, one of the ways it makes a difference is, what about when the evening comes? Right? Or if you want to think about another song, Thomas Dorsey's song, Precious Lord, Take My Hand. When my way grows drear. So what I'm thinking about, is there a word of comfort then in these words for weary travelers who are on a journey? Because see, then if that becomes true, if we know then we're not alone, then there's other things that begin to sound oh so powerful. Like then you can go back into the book of Deuteronomy in chapter 33:27, and it says the eternal God is your refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms. So let me tell one last story. I grew up reading the Good News version of the Bible, or what's called today's English version, with the little stick figures. If you ever had one, right? You saw one with all these little stick, a guy by the name of Nida is the guy that translated it. And it's kind of a paraphrase in places, but he does some neat things with some of the texts. And I remember being here, and every now and then, you don't know this, but you guys, have you ever noticed how sometimes you're in a restaurant and the conversation at the next table is so much better than what's going on at your table? So sometimes when preachers are talking, I'm not talking to David Potter, right? I may be talking to somebody back there, and I'm just letting him overhear the gospel. And if I do it right, he's going to hear it really well. But I just remember one of the families had encountered a tough time. And there were probably 120 people in church that Sunday. I wasn't talking to any of them, except that one couple. And there's 2 Corinthians chapter 4, when it talks in that setting where it talks about how we have this treasure in earthen vessels, right? Or in jars of clay. Or as Dr. Howard Hendricks would say, in an ordinary peanut butter jar. It goes on down and it talks about all these things that Paul's talking about that believers go through. And, like the Standard Translation, it says we're persecuted but not abandoned. But the Good News Bible says there are many enemies, but we are never without a friend. That's the significance of those verses, that he'll never leave us nor forsake us. There are many enemies, but we are never without a friend. Would you pray with me? Lord, I thank you for all these special people. I'm grateful for who they are and for their witness in this community, and I do want to seek your blessing upon their lives. And I pray, Lord, that they know your peace and they know your comfort. And Lord, that somehow then, that all of us might know how to live this out. But at the same time, Lord, as we have opportunity and are sensitive to the leading of your Spirit, that we might be able to share this good news with those around us, and especially with those who might need a word of comfort. That we could let them know that you've promised you'll never leave us nor forsake us. And so we love you and praise you, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.